Hi, thanks for stopping by Grains in Small Places, and today I wanted to share with you a delicious bread recipe, and the recipe calls for maple syrup. So I'll share with you a few ways that you can enhance that maple flavor, or you can keep it very subtle. I got some beautiful maple syrup from Azure Standard, and my family really enjoys it. So let me show you how we can get this into our bread. So let's get started. There's been a lot of people telling me they don't like to use sugar in their bread, and there's a lot of people also telling me they don't necessarily like to use honey. So I find that using the maple syrup is another great alternative to sweetening the bread, but also keeping it natural. So I thought that I wanted to share this with you, and it tastes amazing. Okay, so not only are we going to be making this maple bread, but I'm going to be making it in a cast iron loaf pan. So this loaf pan is a little bit bigger than the one I normally use. I normally use those very small 4x8 pans, not the 4.5 by 8.5, but the 4x8 pans. And I will use my most of my sandwich bread recipes call for like the smaller loaf pans, and then you can get 2 loaves out of that. I'm going to use that size recipe, but we're going to be using it for this larger pan. So I'm going to put all the dough into one. We won't be dividing the dough in half for 2 loaves. If you want to get 2 of these larger loaves, you can go ahead and double the recipe, and that'll get you 2 of these 9x5 loaf pans. So we're going to go ahead and get started on weighing out those wheat berries for this maple bread. Very excited about this. I'm going to be using some hard white and some hard red. You can use all of one or the other, or you can do my little traditional mixture where I'll do mostly hard white and some kamut, but I really wanted the hard red with the maple syrup. I thought it would be really delicious together. So, and then I'll make sure to put a link to all of my things that I'm using in the description box below. My little grain bins that I use, you see me, my mixer, my mills, all those things. Okay, I'm going to use about 400 maybe of the hard white. I'll also make sure to put the recipe down in the description box below, and that way you can print that off. And you can see volumes and weights. So I like to write my recipes to where I have both the volume in grams and the weight. 85. I'm talking and I'm not paying attention. That way, either way, whatever kind of baker you are and whatever way you prefer to measure, you should be able to make this recipe. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take this on over to my mill. And I'm using my Nutrimill Harvest Grain Mill, and I have a coupon code I can share with you. That coupon code is GRAINY. It'll score $20 off anything at the Nutrimill website, all of the mixers, the mills, the Bosch mixers, and all of that. So I'll make sure to put a link to that in the description box below as well. Okay, so while that's milling, you can measure out your water. And I'm going to use about 240 grams here. 246, 240. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and warm this up, not so it's super hot, just warm, maybe a minute or so in the microwave. And grab my mixer, or you can heat it up on the stove, whichever you prefer. And I've now had my mixer for almost a year, or just right around a year. I'm happy to report I love this thing. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and put in that warm water. I'm gonna do about 1/3 cup of very softened butter. So you can see it's very soft here. I'm using unsalted butter here. If you use salted butter, you could use less salt in the recipe, but this is unsalted. So I'm gonna use 1.5 teaspoons of salt. You could do 1 teaspoon of salt if you end up using salted butter instead, but I've been very, very happy with this Baja Gold Sea Salt, and I do have a coupon code if you'd like to try this on your own. I'll put that in the description box below as well. Okay, and this is that beautiful maple syrup that we got from our Azure Standard haul. which I can link that video below too in case you missed that. I have a few of them, but this syrup has been delicious. And it is organic and it is real maple syrup. We're going to use 1/3 a cup here. This is going to be to sweeten our loaf. If you want to enhance that maple syrup flavor, you could always also use maple extract. I'm not going to do that today. So we're just going to go with this. To make it a little more subtle, you can of course just decrease the amount of maple syrup that you choose to use. You can take it all the way down even to 3 tablespoons and it'll just be very subtle. And then also at the end of this loaf, if you want to turn it into a sweeter loaf, you could also drizzle over, you know, while you're eating it or enjoying it, serving it, some maple like icing and things like that. So we're going to use this as a regular bread today. And then 1 egg. Okay, we're going to mix in all of the wet ingredients on low here. I guess I should have cracked the egg in a separate bowl and mixed that in. But that works too. Okay, so we've got all of the, let's turn it up a little bit here. It's okay if it's not perfectly all mixed together. It's okay if we have a little bit of butter stuck here. Alrighty, and here is our beautiful, freshly milled hard white and hard red. I'm gonna go ahead and dump this on in. And we're just gonna mix this together until there's no dry flour left. Okay, now that all the dry flour is mixed, we're gonna go ahead and do the Autolyse step. So I'm gonna cover this and let it sit for about 15 minutes to let that fresh milled flour, all of the liquid absorb into that. And we're gonna set this here to remind ourselves to put the yeast in because we haven't put that in yet. We haven't started the kneading process or anything. If you're planning on doing the active dry yeast instead of instant yeast, now is when you can activate your active dry yeast. So you wanna put some of your warm water in a bowl, just a little bit from the recipe, and then the yeast, and then just a pinch of sugar or even that maple syrup, and let that sit for like 10 to 15 minutes until it comes nice and foamy, and then you'll put it in at the same time that we put it in during the recipe. So we'll be back in about 15 minutes. Okay, so this is to remind us we need to put that yeast in. So definitely want to make sure we do that. So I'm going to use 2 teaspoons of the yeast. And right now is when you would pour in that foamy active dry yeast mixture if that's what you were using instead. And then we're going to just mix that in. And I'm just using the lowest speed. You want to use a pretty low speed whenever you're kneading bread. You don't want to go anything super high or crazy. And then I'm just going to adjust this so that it's not slamming against the wall. And then your kneading time is going to vary for every machine, and different wheat berries, all the things do vary the amount of kneading that you will need. So it's best to just pay attention to what the dough is telling you. I'm gonna go ahead and set my timer here for about 7 minutes and let this knead, and then I'll come back and I'll show you the texture of the dough and how we want it to be. So it's okay if the dough looks a little bit wet in the beginning. Just trust the process, because it ends up that the fresh milled flour continues to absorb some of that liquid as the time goes by. So I'll be back and show you the texture of the dough after we've been kneading this for a while to show you kind of what we're looking for. Okay, so it's about 7 minutes. I can tell already it's very shaggy. It's still stuck everywhere. It's not lifting off the bottom yet. It's not ready to go yet. So I'm gonna go ahead and knead it a little bit longer, probably about the 2 o'clock position on my dial. So let's go ahead and let this go longer. I'll let you know how long this took. Okay, it's been going for about 12 or 13 minutes. I actually forgot to mention I did put a teaspoon of vanilla in this dough. So I have this nice stretchy dough. It's still breaking a little bit when I go to pull the window pane, but this is really, really close. I think I'm gonna go ahead and just knead this for about 1 or 2 more minutes and then call that good. It does not have to have a perfect window pane, but I can tell the dough is just a little bit shaggier than I'd like, and it just seems a little bit tight. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and just knead for about 1 more minute and then we'll be back. Okay, so it's been about 16 to 18 minutes or so. Getting my hands wet. Gonna just check this stretchiness. So I have a nice stretchy dough here. It all wants to stay together. It is sticky. I mean, it's definitely a sticky dough, and that's good. We actually want a sticky dough because it continues to dry and absorb moisture as we go. So as this sits, it's going to dry, it's going to absorb even more moisture. Alrighty. So I'm gonna go ahead and cover this and let this sit for about an hour to rise. We want it to double in size. So it may take somewhere between 1 to 2 hours, depending on the humidity, depending on the temperature in your house, your yeast, all of that stuff. So we'll go ahead and check on it in an hour and I'll be back. Okay, so it has been about an hour. It looks like my dough is just about doubled here. I'm gonna grab my cast iron bread pan and I'm gonna use probably 1 to 2 tablespoons of butter to butter this to make sure that nothing sticks in here. So I got to be pretty generous with this. I'm just going to go ahead and use both of them. Making sure that I get all the cracks and corners. I mean, this may be too much, but who wants to risk getting it stuck in there, right? So that was like 2 tablespoons of butter. I probably could have gotten away with 1.5. But what's wrong with a little extra butter, right? All the way up. Okay, any of this excess gobs, I'm actually just going to use on my counter here. And use that for shaping my loaf. So let me just push that down to the side. I'm going to go ahead and grab this out of here, and since I have the butter on my hands, it actually makes it pretty easy to work with. A little bit got stuck in there. Okay, go ahead and just get both of mine buttered up. All right, what I like to do when I shape my loaves, so if you double this recipe and you have the larger loaf pans, you're gonna wanna cut this in half and make 2 loaves. Or if you're using the tiny little loaf pans like I normally would use, you're gonna wanna divide and make 2 small loaves, but we're gonna make 1 larger loaf. Kind of show you how that's done. Okay, so I like to just make just a small little triangle, pressing the air bubbles out. Okay, so we have this weird sort of triangle shape. I don't know, witch's hat. Perfect for the upcoming season, but I do this all season long. Anyway, okay, so I like to stick my thumbs here and we're gonna stretch just a little bit. We're not going to stretch so hard that it rips or pulls, but stretch a little bit, roll down in, stretch a little bit, roll down in, stretch, roll. We're just going to do this all the way down. And this creates surface tension on the top, and then we have this like wonky weirdo stuff at the bottom here. So what I like to do is take my hands and kind of just cup under. And then same with this side, cup under. And then I like to just pinch underneath all of this excess dough. Under here. Okay. And then I'm just going to lift that and put that into my buttered pan here. I'm going to cover this and let this rise. I'm looking for it to rise to almost double. So it'll be above the pan here because we put all of this dough in this pan. So I'll be back once this is ready to go. I'm going to probably let it go for about like 45 minutes to an hour, and then I'll preheat my oven towards the end. You're going to preheat the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 to 55 minutes. So we'll check. The best way to know for sure is to use a digital thermometer, the kitchen thermometers, and check in the center of the loaf. So down in the center if you can, and make sure it's at least over 190 degrees Fahrenheit with yeast bread. Sourdough breads, you'll want it to be a little bit higher than that. So that's a nice trick that I like to use. So we'll be back once this is risen. Okay, so it has risen. You can see that it's gone past up here to the sides of a couple inches. And when I press on the dough, it comes back slowly, but not so slowly that it's sluggish. And if it comes back really quickly, it means it still needs to rise. So I'd rather bake my loaf just slightly underproofed than overproofed. So if I bake my loaf underproofed, meaning it still could rise just a few more minutes, I might get some splits or cracks on the side. But if I bake my loaf overproofed, which means it's already, the yeast has exhausted all of its food and it has no more rise left, then what happens is it deflates in the oven. So I went ahead and preheated the oven, 350 degrees. We'll check on it and it's gonna go ahead and go on in, and I'll let you see it when it's done. Okay, so we're going to make a little maple butter drizzle to go on the top of the loaf. So I figure we could just do like a tablespoon of butter, and we're just gonna brush this on the top of the loaf. Okay, so we've got that melted, and I'm just gonna drizzle just a little bit of this maple syrup on top. Not very much at all, so maybe like, let's see, a teaspoon. Yeah, let's just say about a teaspoon. And I'm just gonna mix this around to make like a maple butter. Now, if you wanted to make this in a larger scale, you could definitely do that. And then you could use this maple butter to butter the bread slices, which sounds pretty amazing, or toast, or anything. But this has got to probably make one of the best French toasts. We've already got that maple flavor in there. So okay, this is ready to go. I'm gonna brush that on the loaf as it comes out, and it's nice and warm. It may drip off the sides, but I think that's okay. Okay, here it is, a nice, beautiful, giant loaf. I'm gonna go ahead and brush it with our maple butter on the top, and then I'll bring you in when it's time to slice. And then I'm gonna pull this out onto a cooling rack so that it doesn't get condensation in here as it cools. This loaf took about 50 minutes to bake for me. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today while we made this maple bread. I really hope you enjoy it. If you give this recipe a try, let me know down in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. And thanks for stopping by Grains in Small Places. Goodbye.